Hello, my name is Ed Mishner, and I am a longtime member and past president of Bethel Synagogue in Baltimore, Maryland. Today is June 6, 2023. Nearly every living past president of Bethel is here this evening to discuss what significant or important events happened during their administration. In this way, we hope to inform future generations about the history of Bethel. This discussion will be recorded and placed in the archives for clergy, staff, and congregants to view. We have just celebrated our 75th anniversary as a synagogue, ironically the same year as Israel became a country in 1948. Bethel was formed by 10 families that left an Orthodox synagogue so that they could sit with their families during services. In 2023, we have approximately 1,500 family units and over 5,000 people. Our congregation was founded on fellowship and dedicated to the service of the whole family. Our mission statement is Torah, Chesed, and Kedusha. Each past president will briefly speak about their time as president. Our most senior past president was president from 1973 to 1976, and our immediate past president finished 2 days ago in 2023. After all the past presidents have spoken, we will then have a little discussion about what we think Bethel will be like in the future. Our first speaker this evening will be Beverly Penn.
Hi, I'm Beverly Penn. I was president from 2003 to 2005. One of the first things that I did when I became president was, my belief was Rabbi Loeb was the CEO, and he had not been attending executive meetings. And at this time, I asked him to please attend our executive meetings, and he continued to do that throughout my regime, and I guess others after that. And therefore, the precedent was set that the rabbi would be attending the executive meetings. The first thing that I was involved with was decorating the building. And as the building was it was a sanctuary and the hallway were renovated, we had taken down all the art that was in the hallway. And the first thing that came up was that when we had an architect come and place some of the art back up, it was not in the place that the people had signed up for. So we had a new policy that when the congregants give gifts, we cannot promise them where that art will be or whatever gift they give, such as a yad. Some of them expected it to be in the prominent first case. So that was one issue we had to solve. I also got involved with the lion, thanks to Alan Dornfeld, and the lion went in the hallway, and everybody, some people liked it, some people were protesting. So that was also part of it, that when you give a gift to Bethel, we cannot assure you where it will be. We also started to refurbish the mikveh, and at that time, it was really too far gone to refurbish, and we made the decision to really rebuild the mikveh. There were also a lot of policies that we looked into. For example, personnel. And we had a wonderful lawyer come and look over the personnel policies. I think at this time, we hired adult ed director Alan Lipsitz and began to build a really outstanding adult ed program. My husband and I were involved in strategic planning, and we decided that rather than pay somebody for coming in to do strategic planning, we would do it ourselves. And a lot of what we did was involved with the strategic planning. So we had to do organizational charts, who's responsible for what, how the staff sets up. And also in working with personnel, we felt that everyone was treated equally. There was a lot of competition in my regime between the school and the executive organization. And I think we tried to work on that. Set up goals. Welcoming atmosphere was our major goal, so that everybody who walked into Bethel felt welcomed and comfortable, and also bringing in new members. That became a very big goal, I think, in a lot of people's presidencies. I managed teams in my career, and so all of my committee chairmen became part of our team, and we met each month and went over goals, and they did strategic planning, and their goals were keyed in to our goals. We also talked about the cemetery, and when I would go out to the cemetery, could never find where we were going. So Aileen Scher and I spoke to Rabbi Loeb, and it was at this time that we named the gardens, so at least we could figure out a proximity to where, you know, we thought we were going with the grave site. We also talked about computerizing the cemetery, and we helped form the Jewish Cemetery Association, which is now, for the first year, has hired an executive director. So we were definitely in on the organization of that group. And I'm trying to see what else. I'm not sure time-wise, things get a little sketchy for me. I know at the time that Rabbi Schwartz had been here 10 years and was about ready to either leave or stay, depending on what would happen with Rabbi Loeb. And it is, Rabbi Loeb did announce his retirement, and that enabled us to talk to Steve about staying. And I think we renewed his contract at that time. And the next one was Rich Hollander. So.
Well, first, before we go to Rich, Denise Franz will speak. You're muted, Denise.
Denise, come off mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Thank you for indulging me tonight. I'm kind of babysitting and I'm on call. So I appreciate the time. I have a few things. There are a lot of things happened during a 2-year administration, and some are, you know, things that happen often. For example, we had all the clergy contracts coming up at the same time. Some were significantly more complicated than others, but we handled them beautifully. And so, you know, that's always an accomplishment. The big thing that I think defined my administration it did not happen at Bethel, and that is the Tree of Life shooting on Shabbat morning. Once that happened, every synagogue up their security. We had a security team. We made sure we had armed guards for everything, all the time, and especially for Shabbat. And that was something that was very different. And, and we had to raise the security dues. There was a lot involved in that. So that certainly changed things. And at the same time, when you have guards, it becomes like a little less welcoming. So we really worked at warming up the lobby and making people feel more comfortable. My big goal of my administration was to change how interfaith families were treated. I had information that the RA, which is the Jewish, the conservative arm of the halacha that makes the laws for the conservative Jews, that they were allowing non-Jews to be members of synagogues. So one thing that I wanted to do, and do it, as thoroughly as I could, is to make sure that all couples were individual members, whether they were Jewish or not. And it really seemed to make a difference for interfaith families. They were very grateful that we did that change. We had our second live at Bethel during my administration, and that one we redid the playground and the bike path, and also the pavilion, the covered pavilion. And one thing that I really was thinking about is that we spend, as presidents, a lot of things that we do really seem like it's the next president. Like I did live, and then Eddie was there to unveil the pavilion. And that's what it is in Bethel. It's you move on and you move on. And I must say, like Michael Rubenstein, and I'm sure he'll talk about this, he did strategic planning and worked on it diligently with the board for 2 years. However, during my administration, we came out with new, and we don't call them a mission statement, we call them core values. And so it was during my administration, but certainly Michael had a lot to do with that. And the thing that I think the most kudos for was something I had nothing to do with, which was the renovation of the ladies' restroom. People were thrilled. The women, oh my God. And I took a group of men in there so they could see it, because it really is so beautiful. So that's what happened during my administration.
Well, thank you very much,
Eddie.
Bob Smelkinson.
Okay, having heard some of the things I just heard, and they were pleasurable, but my situation is, well, first, let me follow your rules. I'm Bob Smelkinson. From the ancient years of 1973 and 1976, about 50 years ago. And I was a president for 3 years in those days, which they required, and that was a long haul, let me tell you, because we did have interesting things going on in those days. But the point is, they were different than today, and I think they're not as pertinent as what I just heard about armed guards and the problems you have today with taking care of our synagogue. That was never a thought in our days. The doors were wide open all the time, and we welcomed people to come and go as they liked. And that was I would have to say one of the pleasures of being a member in those days. Today, it's a little difficult, and it's a put off to some extent. I was most fortunate to be very friendly with most of the original founders and presidents. They were wonderful people. And I three of them in particular, and I want to mention that, were Rube Levinson, the original president, who happened to be my next door neighbor as a kid. I was just a kid, and Rube and his wife were wonderful neighbors. I have lots of stories about them. The other was Julius Offutt, just a fantastic guy, a wonderful friend, and a close associate at Bethel. And Milton Roseman, another founder and president. Those three particularly were warm and lovely, and made my presidency a little easier. One thing I want to say about my own history as a president was that I was destined to be the 8th president of Bethel. And I don't know if this has ever happened before in the history of synagogues, but the next vice president at that time was Ira Askin. And Ira Askin took me aside at some point, I don't remember where or when, and he said, "Bob, you know, I'm 7 years older than you. And really, you could be a vice president later. It wouldn't make any difference. You could be president, excuse me." And so he and I made a deal between the two of us to switch. He became 8th and I became 9th. And we didn't go to the board and ask for permission. We didn't have an election. That's what we just told them. That's what we're going to do, and it happened. Things change, you know, and the dictates of a synagogue of our size. I was most fortunate, and Bethel was exceedingly fortunate in having people like the Rabbi Akers, a remarkable man in so many ways. He did get critiqued by some because he was perhaps a little above them, like me. Because the truth is that I sat through many of his lectures and sermons, and I would say, "What did he say?" But he earned an accolades for being a remarkable historian, as well as a rabbi, and knowledgeable in Hebrew works. The one thing that we heard about him, because he wrote so much, was that he was friendly with Arnold Toynbee. Now, I think that story is probably well known by most of the presidents here listening, but if you ever, and I don't want to take any more time for that, but Arnold Toynbee's story and Rabbi Akers and their letter writing, multiple letter writings between the two of them on Jewish history, is fascinating. Ask me, I'll be happy to tell you how I understand it went. After that, so that was that rabbi, and of course, I was lucky to be part of the original choosing of Rabbi Loeb at that time on the committee, and I can only say that the difference between these two rabbis is exceeding. Completely different individuals and rabbis, and in many ways we were lucky in that, because some members enjoyed, older members were serious about the Hebrew and Jewishness, and Rabbi Loeb fit that. Then we seemed to attract some younger members, and Rabbi Loeb fit into that picture perhaps a little more conveniently. But both of these men were just marvelous for Bethel and for Jewishness in Baltimore. Of course, we had Kedra Hammerman during that time, and we were so fortunate in having a classic cantor, classic in every way, an entertainer too, and he was good for Bethel. He and his wife too. Then we had Joe Lepofsky, who I knew quite well, who ran the school in a fabulous way during my time. I want to say that one of the interesting things was that the school did not have a preschool, and my wife Jackie and I had young children at that time, so we went to Joe Lepofsky and said, "What are we going to do about a preschool?" He said, "We'll start one," and that's what we did. I was told that he did it in a very personal way. He would have to go out in his car and pick up some of the kids to bring them in to make sure we had a starting school, but it worked. The other issues at the time, and the only two issues that I can recall that took some effort on the part of the rabbi to solve, and the president using the rabbi's efforts, were donors who would come to make a contribution. And the donors in those days, as I recall, would often come and say, "This is where I want the donor sign to be. This is the wall, and we want it in the sanctuary." Of course, the rules were no donors' efforts, dedications would be in the sanctuary, and they weren't. But there was, for those of you who have a memory, the walls in those days were a lot cleaner than they are today. We've added a lot of items that I would have, and we did object to, but it's hard. It's very difficult. I mean, you can't say no to some of the contributions that we earned and needed. And Bethel is the lesser in some ways for the decorations. I was involved with the refinancing of the mortgage with the First National Bank. And we did get, I don't know, I can't recall the situation of the markets in those days, but we did reduce the mortgage interest rate at that particular time. And I don't know whether we have a mortgage today or not. I had 50 years, is a long time to keep up with that. At any rate, that was all I want to contribute, because there's not very much. And I had a wonderful time. And it was a great time to be president of Bethel 50 years ago. And I'm sure it's even better today.
That was very nice. Nice historical touch. Elliot?
I'm Elliot Marenblum, and I was president from 1989 to 1991. I'd like to add a parallel to individuals who may not have followed fully all of the sermons from Rabbi Yegas, either in the sanctuary or Sunday morning in the men's club. But I sat there with a thesaurus and a dictionary on my lap, and I was able to get through most of those sermons and lectures, Bob. Actually, my situation of becoming president was perhaps different than others. There had been the resignation of a second vice president, and I was asked by Sidney Freeman Al-Vashalom to consider becoming the second vice president, but with the intent of going through the first and going through to be the president. And based upon Sidney's support, I accepted that opportunity and enjoyed every part of the 2 years. Worked hard, did what we had to do, but I want to share some of those situations with you. In June of 1990, there was a fire in the administrative offices of the synagogue. I got a call about 1 o'clock in the morning from Gil Kleiner, who was our executive director, and said, "You better get up here. There's a bit of a problem." And so my wife Eileen and I went up there, and saw the decimation of Rabbi Loeb's office. As we understood it, the fire was started because of the extension cord he was using for his computer that really didn't have the capacity to handle a computer of that dimensions. And as a result of that, we embarked upon then a renovation, obviously, of the offices area, but also a renovation of the synagogue. We were very lucky that the flames did not hit the synagogue itself, but they came mighty, mighty close to the synagogue itself. The damage was restricted to Rabbi Loeb's office and that entire wing. I think some kids may remember that because of the fire, they didn't have to, the Hebrew school was canceled the next Sunday morning. And so as we turned the cars around, the kids and their parents thought that was nice. But it was just part of a very significant memory for me of that period of time. Need to recognize, give a shout out, as they say, to David Gould and his son for their support with the insurance needed to do that renovation. And as a result, the synagogue received funds, which allowed for some significant improvements in updating the building, that wing of the building itself, the computer hardware, as well as the software. And a lot of the budget and finance systems were updated because we changed from the provider of the computer systems to someone else. We were all shocked when the early part of July, I think it was the 4th of 1990, when Joe Lepofsky passed away suddenly. It really caused us to think about who the replacement would be and how we would handle that. There was an individual or two that we wanted who turned us down. There was an individual who applied that we felt was not the person for that job. I believe that David Yomkis was extremely involved in that search for a replacement for Joe Lepofsky. And because we were not satisfied with who could have replaced him at that time, partly because of the availability of personnel, and partly because we thought we needed to be able to mourn the death of Joe Lepofsky. He was an integral part of the Bethel family, and to bring somebody in as a replacement too soon could have been not a good idea. And so as a result, Rabbi Mishkin, who was mentioned earlier by Bob, who had been the assistant rabbi at the time, was approached about being the interim principal of the Hebrew school, in addition to all of his rabbinic duties. And he accepted that. We rewarded him in terms of his salary for that year. And because we were so pleased and appreciative of the job he did for that year, we continued that through the next year in terms of his salary. Connected to the fire was a very emotional moment for me, not just seeing the fire, but being with Rabbi Loeb and burying the books. There's a tradition in Judaism that when books are burned, destroyed, need to be discarded, that they have to be buried. And so we were at the Bethel Cemetery, and I don't know exactly where the marker is for that either, but the important thing is that watching him bury those books, including a very special picture of him and Rabbi Agus, and a very special picture of him and his father, made that a very meaningful moment in terms of my experience at that time. Shortly thereafter, we received a call from a rabbi from Rochester, New York. He had retired. In fact, he probably had moved to New York at the time from Rochester, and he offered us the opportunity to purchase his books. I'll remember that executive committee meeting very much so, because there was some controversy about whether we should or should not buy those books for Rabbi Loeb's library. Obviously, the outcome was a positive one, and we made that purchase, but it was important to us as the leaders. I'm referring to David and Albert, who were the two vice presidents during the time that I was president, in doing what was right in terms of replenishing that office. Dr. Bohr became the principal. He was selected by a search committee at that time, as I mentioned, and we were very pleased to bring him on board. And so he started at Bethel in 1991, which is sort of the tail end of the time that I was president. And he's been with us for a long period of time.
Thank you. Dave?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dave Yumkis. I was president between 91 and 93. I was not the first Yumkis to become president of Bethel. My brother Charles was president about 12 years before me. Unfortunately, Charles is not able to be on today's call because he's having memory issues. And I was thrilled that they highlighted him at our 75th anniversary because he did remember what happened in his time at Bethel. And it was because of my brother who wound up getting the whole family to join. I do want to try to fill in a few of the gaps. Bob Smelkinson, what he said, 71 to 73, or 74. At that time, presidents were serving for 3 years, as was Charles. And then the next one was Elliott, which was 89. It just so happened that my entree into Bethel, I was president of an agency of the Associated. And when I finished that, I was asked by Sidney Friedman and Max Mendelson if I would be a member of the board, which I accepted because I believed the value of synagogue life to the Jewish community. I do want to recognize the fact that Sidney and Max both were presidents of the men's club. At the time, the men's club was an important part of the congregation. So their ascendant to the presidency of the congregation came through the men's club. They were both president of the men's club, and as a result, they eventually became members of the congregation. Trying to remember in our past, I want to bring up 2 points. One was at the time, one thing about Bethel, of our 75 years in existence, we have been a cohesive congregation in which we've never had any major issues, both with the clergy and with our lay leaders. There was an incident at the time when Charles was president. We had an executive director, I think Bob Smelkinson and Alan Dornfeld will remember this so well yet. We had an executive director, Andy Braun, who was a terrific guy. And unfortunately, he had an affair with a congregant in which he eventually married her. But Jacob Agus was, as rabbi, could not tolerate that type of behavior. So he never, ever got involved in politics of the congregation, but he came to a board meeting and insisted that Andy could no longer be executive director because of what happened. And as a result, the next day he was let go. So that was the only incident that I remember in our history that we had any issues at all. Also, I want to mention that presidents at the time, as Bob said, there were 3 years. There was only one president in our history that actually resigned during his tenure. Bob, I think you'll remember that, and that was Klaus Buchdahl. And I never knew why Klaus resigned. And I did ask my brother just recently. And even with his memory issues, he remembered. And maybe Alan Dornfeld will remember this, but at the time, the congregation wanted to buy Israel bonds, and they wanted to buy it under the congregation's name, not individuals as we normally do. And as a result, Klaus was 100% against that, and the board voted to buy bonds under the congregation's name. And as a result, Klaus, being a principled person that he was, resigned. So he was the only president that resigned during his term. Elliot mentioned I worked very closely with Elliot and Albert during my tenure. And Albert actually laid out, sent in some of the things that happened during our times, which I thought was wonderful, Albert. But what I wanted to say was, we at the time, what's the name? It always gives me the credit. Al always gives me the credit of hiring him. I don't know whether he was hired under Albert's time, my time, or Elliot's time, but I always get the credit of hiring Al, because he always says that David Yumkus hired him. I happen to be the last president not to ask for money during an annual appeal. So all you big spenders after me, you can blame yourselves, because we never, by any president before me and up to me, never asked money in our annual appeal. And then after me, then everything started to happen, and we needed money, and that happened. I remember distinctly when I came in with Rabbi Agus when he retired, and especially when he passed away. Bethel never had a retirement fund to look after these people. And as a result, when Miriam Agus needed money, the congregation would just pitch in and do whatever was necessary in order to fund whatever needed to be at the time. So I felt that was really a travesty. So one of the first things that I did when I became president was create a retirement fund, both for the cantor and for the rabbis. And Saul Hammerman was very appreciative of that. He was so appreciative that we went out to lunch all the time, and I had to pay for his lunch. So it was, let's see if there's anything else. Oh, and Albert mentioned the fact that we did have our Shabbat services at the time. Was we had Friday night services in which girls were bat mitzvahed on Friday night, and the boys were bar mitzvahed on Saturdays. So both of my daughters were bat mitzvahed on Friday night. We had a service at 8 o'clock, and religiously I attended for years those Friday night services. So they were wonderful, and I never thought twice about it until things changed thereafter. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Albert?
David, I'll pick up on what you mentioned about the bat mitzvahs.
First, give your name and your dates of
right,
please.
Albert Katz. I was the president. I have to look at the note here to see. I was from 1993 to 1995.
Right.
And I also want to say that every president generally serves as a second vice president with a team, and then he has a new team coming in when he's the president. I had the privilege really of being a part of Elliot Merenblum's team when he was the president, and of course David Yumkus, and then Alan Dornfeld and John Abosh were part of my team, and it was a great team. It really was, and we worked beautifully together. We had lots of good conversations. Beverly Penn mentioned that I didn't know this until just now, this meeting, that Beverly Penn was the person who invited Rabbi Loeb to become a member of the executive committee. And I think all of the presidents at least from me and probably Alan and maybe John, got a a lot of flack from Rabbi Loeb about not being a member of the executive committee. And there were good reasons and bad reasons why we made those decisions. But I think ultimately it's the better part to have a rabbi as part of the executive committee. But Beverly mentioned the fact that Mark Loeb was like a CEO in every respect of the congregation. And the executive committee felt that we knew where he stood on most issues, and it would be a challenge in executive committee meetings to have the rabbi. Maybe I'm sorry about the fact that I told him no, but so be it. I had a wonderful relationship with Mark Loeb. I used to attend Morning Minyan fairly regularly, and my office at the time was in Owings Mills. So I would leave the Minyan and I would go to Mark's apartment across the street and have a bagel and coffee, or sometimes it would be more elaborate than that. And not every day, but regularly, at least twice a week, he and I would just have breakfast together. Maybe we talked about opera or the symphony at the time, or not always, but he knew where I stood on certain issues, and he rarely beat me up on it, but once in a while he did. The most important thing, and I kept thinking, what happened in my administration that was important? The most important thing, I think, one of the most important things was, as David mentioned, the change in the bar and bat mitzvah program. I think in those early days, people wanted to have a bat mitzvah. It wasn't part of the conservative tradition at the time, certainly wasn't part of the Orthodox tradition. But Rabbi Agus recognized that it was important. And so I think it was at his direction that we created a book. I think he created a small, thin book of selected haftorahs. It wasn't all of the haftorahs, maybe a dozen at most. I know my bar mitzvah haftorah was in there, but I never asked how it got selected. And what we did was we used that book, and I suspect those books are still around someplace at Bethel. It was a thin book, and it had the English translation and then the Hebrew. And the congregation would come in on Friday night and pick up that book, and we had a regular Friday night service. And then the cantor at the time would give a little prayer over the bat mitzvah, call her up, and she did the brachas, and then she did the haftorah, and it was nice. I think it was really in my administration that we did this, and my daughter Susan was about to be a bat mitzvah. And when I came home and told her what we were thinking of doing, I really caught it big time, because she felt that it was her night. She was not going to share it with anybody. And she said, "How can you do this?" And I didn't realize at the time, but we brought it to the board, and the board said, Mark Loeb said, "This is the best thing we can do," because the Friday night bat mitzvah was really an ersatz bat mitzvah. It wasn't a true bat mitzvah. Now, if you remember, those of you who can remember, we did give the bat mitzvah an aliyah. She had the first aliyah on Saturday morning. And at that time, the cantor would call her up and give her the appropriate introduction. And then she would read the first aliyah. So in her preparation, she learned the first aliyah and then the haftorah. It did cause problems, first off, people like my daughter, our daughter Susan, wasn't real keen about sharing her day. But the real problems came with the parents, because on Saturday morning, once we began to have all of the doubles, and I think there were even times when we might have had triples, the parents would be notified that your child, your son or your daughter, was going to be paired with so-and-so. And immediately they would be phone calls to the other parents. Well, what kind of a kiddish are you planning to have for so-and-so? And in those days, I don't think we publicized it in this manner, but we had basically 3 kiddish, types of kiddish. We called them an A, a B, and a C. The C kiddish was what is also called the lobby kiddish, where it was nice and it was good, but it was basically in the lobby, not in the auditorium. Then the B kiddish was an upgrade, and then the A kiddish was really something special. In fact, I'm not sure, but I think we even had 2 types of A kiddishes, one milchik and one fleischik. And the fleischik was really over the top. Well, this did cause a lot of consternation among the parents, because, you know, if somebody didn't feel that they could swing a particular kiddish for the cost, and you had to invite the congregation to a kiddish, then a lot of people left after the services on Saturday morning, invited their friends. I remember before the service was over, the rabbi would say, so-and-so's family is invited to a kiddush in the Alfred Auditorium, and so-and-so's family is invited to a kiddush someplace else. And it wasn't the nicest way to do it, but that's how it worked. That's the most important thing that I can remember. I'm sure there were other things that happened during the administration, but I wanted to leave you with a few little quick anecdotes that occurred. All of us, as past presidents, had numerous opportunities to be a gabbai. And some of us weren't sure exactly what to do and how to do it, and so on and so forth. I loved being a gabbai. I was a part of the service, and it was there. And I don't know whether we still have the little silver pieces denoting the number on the aliyah.
Yes.
So good. Anyway, I'm on the right side of being a gabbai one day, and I'm collecting the silver from the person coming up. And I knew that this one particular member, who's no longer with us, but I wouldn't mention his name anyway, had been very ill. And he came to services on a Saturday morning, and Rabbi Loeb said, so-and-so is going to be getting an aliyah, etc. I said, fine, I know him. So we called him up, and I noticed, I think he'd had some serious surgery, but he was finally getting back to shul. And I noticed that as he was walking down, he was in the bullpen, but he came up, he was sort of it appeared to me, holding his stomach. And I thought, still recovering from surgery. And he gets up, walks the steps, still holding sort of his stomach. And at that point, I reached out to ask him for the piece of the silver. And he was very excited about getting the aliyah. And he reached to get the silver, and his hands moved away from his stomach. And he had lost so much weight that his pants went right down. Well, I don't think too many people saw it because he was sort of standing on the side. But Rabbi Loeb looked at me, and I said to our member, just take your pants and pull them up. We're gonna keep right on going here. And Joe Weinstein was the Torah reader, and he didn't flinch a bit. Nothing, kept right on going. So that was one of my fondest, funniest memories of being a Gabbai, being a member of Bethel. On that, I'll turn it over to Ed and bring on the next person.
Thank you. That was a really funny story. Thank you.
Ed,
now to Mr. Bethel Allen.
Ed, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yes.
Yeah, I would ask everybody. Everybody's statements and everything are wonderful tonight, but please, the ground rules were 5 to 7 minutes, and it's really not fair to everybody to go on. And I'm timing everybody to 10 minutes. So please, everybody, and I really apologize for being the Grinch here, but we really, we've got to move on. So please limit your statements to 5 minutes, which is what Ed originally proposed. Many of us have things to do. So I apologize, but please, thank you.
Michael, actually 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay, whatever.
That's part of the Bethel
we're on
tradition.
10 and 12 minutes here on some, so please, thank you.
Okay, Alan.
All right, I'm gonna be quick because I really didn't do that much in the 2 years that I was president. But I was president 95 to 97, and I had the pleasure of being mentored by Max, Lou, Elliot, David, and Albert, and they were all great mentors to me as I served on their administrations. When I was president, the senior rabbi was Rabbi Mark Loeb. Kenner Hammerman was finishing his career. His last full year was 1997. That was my last full year. And in 1997, we formed a search committee, and Kenner King came in 1998. The search enabled what was concluded after my administration. And so the my assistant rabbis were the end of Joel Mishkin's term with Bethel, followed by John Perlman, who stayed through 98. Now, Albert left off two very, very important things that he did that he should take credit for because he did it. And one was the total 100% renovation of the Offit Auditorium. He did that because I remember the walls bare, the floor bare, and when the Offit Auditorium was opened, the grand opening was the gala dinner for the 1995 Capital Endowment Campaign. And that was a major event that allowed us to fund the expenses for that campaign. Now, the Capital Endowment Campaign was, without question, the highlight of my campaign, of my term. However, it was Albert's idea. Now, Albert came up with a great idea towards the end of his term to have a capital endowment campaign. Bethel never had one, but he was smart. He came up with the idea and then left office. So here it was. Here it was. I'm coming in 95. I hadn't raised a nickel in my entire career, and we hired a professional fundraising company to analyze the membership of Bethel, and they interviewed, they tabulated, they came up with the fact that Bethel could raise $3 million if everything was perfect. Well, we looked at that and we said, that's not enough. And so when we started the campaign, Rabbi Loeb and I sat down and said, who would be the best person to be the chairman of the campaign? It was Mickey Steinberg. Mickey had just lost the election, the primary Democratic election for governor. And I said to him, his defeat was my luckiest day because he and I worked together closely for 2 years in the campaign. When we set the goal, for 5 million because we felt we had to do better than 3. And quite honestly, the campaign started with the kickoff dinner in September of 95. I left office in 97. John Abash concluded the campaign, and the total dollars raised was $7 million. In those days, that was really one hell of a lot of money, more money than the Bethel had ever raised, probably in the previous 40 years. The point being is that we were able to have a capital, $4 million for capital,
we created the Gorn Chapel, the Stoller Administrative Wing, and for the newer presidents, we didn't have a second floor. There was no second floor in the offices when we in the 90s were president. It was all the construction started in 2000 when the Gorn Chapel was built, the Stoller second floor was built, and also the Hubert School Wing. So that was created as a result of the campaign. But I still believe right now the most important part of that was the creation of the endowment. $3 million started being funded in 2000. It was collected after all the capital expenses had been paid. And I think we all know, those of us who are involved now, budget and the Budget and Finance Committee, that currently the endowment yields a lot of money to our current budget. I can't remember how much it is this past year. It might have been on the order of about $500,000 to our operating budget. But the endowment today, from that start in 2000 of zero, is 10 million unrestricted and 5 million restricted, for a total of 15 million. So the congregation really stepped up. And as I said, the construction began in 2000. It took the building, the campus, where it needed to be in order to expand, cover the membership. And I think without question, fundraising today is part of the culture of the congregation. And I'm proud to say I had a part in that. How'd they do, Michael? All right.
Well, I'll just add
Thanks,
a footnote.
everybody.
I'll just add a footnote to that. Alan is still very, very involved in the endowment, watches it like a hawk, and that's his little pet project. So he's done a wonderful job. Thank you. John?
Thank you, Ed. John A. Bosch, president from 1997 to 1999. And if you think following Alan Dornfeld as president is easy, you've got another thing coming. But in any case, I want to say something before I say something. I just want to say that I very much appreciate being part of this group of past presidents. We have a wonderful group of people. We have great camaraderie. We've all paid our dues. We have the same experiences, and I'm really honored to be part of this group. I also want to mention, before I go too far, I want to just recognize some of the past presidents that unfortunately are not with us anymore. I'll go through it very quickly. They were integral parts of Beth L. Reuben Levinson, Melvin Chernoff, Samuel Kaiser, Dr. William Raffel, Julius Offit, Milton Roseman, Milton Snyder, Ira Askin, Klaus Buchdahl, Mildred Miller, Sidney Friedman, Max Mendelson, and Jerry Schneidman. They all played integral parts in Beth El, and just want to mention that. I also would like to thank my mentors, Alan Dornfeld, Albert Katz, David Yumkus, and those before them for guidance. I found it extremely helpful to get ideas. In fact, I've got to tell you, some of the best ideas I ever got came from other people. And I'll explain that as I go along a little more. One of my accomplishments, which I was not happy about at the time, sort of was not very proud, but during my presidency, we had the first $3 million budget, which was a lot of money at the time. And I was not happy about it, but you'll see some of the things that I believe we did that brought us up to a $3 million budget. During my term, we negotiated a sabbatical for Rabbi Loeb. He took off 4 months. Margot Gillison was president after me. And I can't recall, Margot, whether during your presidency or mine, we hired an interim rabbi. It was probably yours, but it could have been mine. I don't even remember for sure. But we did that. Also, during my presidency, we expanded the Memorial Park to include a non-sectarian section, which was really somewhat controversial at the time. As you probably know now, there is a section for Jewish members and their non-Jewish spouses. That did not exist before. That was something Rabbi Loeb wanted, and it's something that the board overwhelmingly approved. It was really not difficult to do that. Now, as we get older, we forget a little bit, but I seem to remember, which was different than what Beverly Penn said. I think it was Beverly that said it. During my term, we approved the first director of adult education, Alan Lipsitz. We approved the position. Again, that was part of the $3 million increase. I remember many phone calls negotiating with him and talking with him and understanding it. And he sold me on the concept. The board approved it, and we've been rocking and rolling ever since. Alan was a fantastic director of adult education and did a fantastic job. Unfortunately, he passed away in his prime, but he was just wonderful and beloved by everyone. Also, during my term, again, some of my best ideas come from other people. Dr. David Miller, who was a devoted member of Bethel, lovely guy, came to me and said, you know, we ought to hire a development director. We ought to have a development director at Bethel. And he said, look, he said, I'll underwrite it. He said, you hire somebody, and if he doesn't pay his salary, if he doesn't earn his salary for the first year, I'll pay the difference. I'll underwrite it. Well, the board approved it. Again, part of the $3 million. Board approved it. We started, I wouldn't say a national search, a very local search. And fortunately, we hired Alan Dornfeld as our first development director, did a fabulous job. And needless to say, David Miller knew what he was doing because we didn't have to ask him for a nickel, because Alan Dornfeld did a fantastic job in his first year, set up the whole department, and has been raising a lot of money ever since, until he left for Israel Bonds. But then Aileen Scher took over, did a fabulous job till she passed away. And now Amanda Beitman is doing a wonderful job. But David Miller really should get credit for suggesting that. And that's what we did. Also, when I was president, we transitioned from Cantor Hammerman to Cantor King. And that was a little challenging for different reasons. I won't get into it, but we dealt with it. That was one of my first challenges, probably the first day I became president, but we worked through it, and the rest was history. It all worked out well. Probably almost finished. I remember bar and bat mitzvah dates way back then. They would come out, it might still be the same, and people would rush to the caterer and to the photographer and so forth. There was a mad rush when they came out. Maybe a little different today, but I enjoyed being president. I have to say, overall, very time consuming, but pretty easy. Not a lot of aggravation. I enjoyed it, and I was very, very happy I did it, and I'm honored to have served as president of Bethel. Thank you.
Thank you. Margot?
Margot Gillison. I served from 1999 through 2001. So we have transitioned into a new century, if you will. I guess what I remember most, first of all, I was the first woman president since Mildred Miller, who had taken over from Klaus Buchdahl when he resigned. I guess I felt that it was a challenge as a woman to run the congregation, if you will, just the way it had been done before, without making any startling changes. Alan and John, during their administrations, raised all the money I would ever need. They did all the building I would ever do. So I had to find a place for myself, I guess, that would get down to who we really were. And part of it was an analysis of how the clergy lay leadership and a school, an executive director could get together harmoniously. One of the big problems was, even though Rabbi Loeb loved his computer and was on it, there was no computer coordination in getting a schedule together. So Rabbi Loeb would hire a speaker, and then Eyal would do some in the school program, and then I'm sorry, Gil Kleiner would then say, I don't have room for this, I don't have room for this. And so we finally coordinated a calendar that was electronic, that everybody could go on before they made any plans for meetings or events or special things, to look at least what was being done, what was being thought of. So initially there was a breakthrough in communication that led to other things. And one of the things was that maybe because I'm a woman, I got a lot of complaints from everybody to saying, you got to fix this and you got to fix this. And they were all interpersonal kinds of things. So I thought long and hard about it. And I think I even brought Alan and John and Robert Keene into the picture to say, we really need an outside facilitator to let these people talk about what bothers them. Because I was, it was a joy to see Yvonne is still with us. And when I read the last bulletin, to believe that she had been there as many years and as competently as she was. And we believe in continuity at Bethel. Clearly, we have had very few rabbis and very few cantors, and we're growing and healthy and wonderful. It makes me very proud to be a part of this chain of history. But we did bring in a firm of facilitators, employment experts, if you will, who sat down with every employee, with the exception of the teachers, but all of the executive staff, and brought them together in groups, and then with their immediate boss, et cetera, et cetera. And there was, for the first time, people felt a little bit freer about telling somebody what was really wrong. We didn't make all the corrections that we wanted to make, but it was a start on having this terrific congregation, well-funded, well thought out in every direction. And now the people who were working there needed to have that voice and that commitment to the congeniality, the continuity, the caring for each other. And so for my 2-year, I guess I would call myself a steward. Stewardship was important. No reason to make changes when no changes were needed. And one of the highlights of the year after my presidency was that I became a bat mitzvah, celebrating the 63rd, this is the 50th anniversary of what would have been my bat mitzvah. I was 63 at the time, and it was very meaningful for me. And just as an aside, I live in California now. I'm very active in our temple. And last year, I bat mitzvahed 13 women who had never, ever bat mitzvahed. So that's one of my personal things, but it led to my having the experience myself and how much it meant to me. But I left what I thought was at least a legacy of some peace. And I had a lot of help from Robert and John and Alan to keep me on the straight and narrow, so to speak. So thank you very much.
Before we go on, one thing that nobody's answered or talked about, when was Gil Kleiner hired? Under whose administration? Anybody remember?
Yeah, I think it was mine.
Yours? Okay.
May 15th, 1989.
Okay.
Okay, it was then Elliot.
I mean, that was an important part of our history, and I just wanted to get that there.
Who was his predecessor?
It was Rose, right? Rose Pollock.
Rose Pollock. That's right, Rose Pollock. Yeah, yeah,
Rose.
Okay, Robert Keene.
Thank you, Ed. I'm Robert Keene. I was president of Bethel from 2001 to 2003. And as they say, I was the thorn between two roses, between Margaret Gillison and Beverly Penn. But as a practicing orthopedist, I had a busy practice, and being president of Bethel, I could say that they were the 2 best years of my life. So I thought about a few things that I don't know that people really recognize. Working with Rabbi Loeb was truly wonderful, and I became very close to him. But he wanted consensus. So one day he came to me and he said, Robert, I have a daughter who's gay, and she's a member of the congregation. And I would like to have a commitment ceremony, but I want to have consensus of the board. I could do this because I'm the Mora Da'atra. That means he does all the religious things. He can do it outside of the synagogue, but he wanted to do it on the synagogue premises. So I said, okay, let's discuss it at the board. Well, we discussed this for about 4 months. Every board meeting, we brought this up. And if you want to ever have full capacity and everyone showing up at a board meeting, this is a good topic to have. So it turned out that we studied Parsha in Vayikra. Rabbi Schwartz went to the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the Conservative Movement. And eventually the board discussed it. After 4 months, I said, enough's enough. We have to call the vote. And it turned out that it was something like 36 for, 13 against, and I don't know, like 5 abstentions. If you want to know what happened with this commitment ceremony, Aileen Scher told me that it was absolutely gorgeous, but I think about a year later, they broke up. So that's the story there. The second story I wanted to tell you was that when Margot was president, she and I took Rabbi Loeb out to lunch one day, and we had about 10 things on the list, and the first 9 went through, and he said, fine, 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 fine. And then number 10 came up, and I said to him, I said, you know, Mark, I think it would be a good idea if we made Rabbi Schwartz the associate rabbi. Well, that did not go over big. Remember that, Margot? He came out of the chair. It was at the Chinese restaurant on Reisterstown Road. And I said, oh my God, what's going to happen here? So what I found out was that if you ever wanted to get someone to be on your side, you have to make him believe that it's his idea. So this is going on for a whole year. We're now walking down the hallway together for I think it was like a June board meeting. And he turns to me and he says, you know, Robert, I'm getting really tired. Came up with this idea that I think you should make Rabbi Schwartz associate rabbi. I go, I think that's the worst idea I ever heard. When he goes, what? So I said, nah, I'm just kidding. I think it's a terrific idea. I'm glad you brought it up. We voted on it at the board meeting, and boom, and he became associate rabbi. So yeah, I thought that was pretty funny that day. I have one more thing I want to just bring up, but we talked about mentors. Alan Dornfeld was my mentor, and I thank him for that. And what Alan taught me was when a congregant comes to you, and this is for presidents in the future, you should know this. If they come and they ask you for something, there's 3 things you have to say. 1, sounds like a good idea. Number 2, I'll take it under consideration. And number 3, I'll get back to you. Well, it turns out that I listened to him all the time, except this one congregant came to see me, and she says, Robert, for 8 years, I've been complaining about the stairs that lead up to the stage in the Offit Auditorium, and we need handrails. I said, okay. Well, the next day I went to Gil, and I said, Gil, I want you to get handrails up on the Offit Auditorium. Within a week, there were handrails after 8 years of this woman complaining to all the past presidents. So I just want you to know that from now on, when you congregants go to Offit Auditorium, whether it's for Wednesday night's program or for high holidays in the Offit Auditorium, that's my legacy. Handrails on the steps to the Offit Auditorium. And that's what I leave you with. So thank you.
I think we should have your name imprinted on those handrails then.
It's okay.
Rich Hollander.
Thank you, Ed. Rich Hollander was president from 2005 to 2007. I think this exercise is really important to preserve the institutional memory of all of us for Bethel. Overall, my 2-year tenure as president was probably characterized more by the transition of clergy. As Beverly mentioned earlier, Rabbi Loeb was somewhat ambivalent about retiring at the time, and we talked to him at length, and I appointed a committee to negotiate a package with Rabbi Loeb and his representative, which was successful, and he did agree to retire from Bethel. At the same time, Rabbi Schwartz was at the end of his contractual term, and I wanted to make sure that he stayed at Bethel, and also that he knew the entire congregation was behind him. And when he'd be elevated to senior rabbi, I believe I called every member of the board and the head of every committee to make sure that no one raised his or her hand and said, gee, let's have a national search. And so I made sure that going into the meeting, it would be unanimous that Rabbi Schwartz would be elevated to be senior rabbi. And some of you may recall that we wanted to make that meeting special, and we held that at the Jewish Museum of Maryland downtown, where Rabbi Schwartz was officially voted in as senior rabbi. While all this was going on, late one evening, about 10 o'clock at night, I got a call at home from Rabbi Sorokin, who I did not know at the time, and she very much wanted to come to Bethel. And she said, I'm really in an awkward, difficult situation because I'm a rabbi at a congregation in Rockland County, New York, and the leadership there is giving me a deadline of a week from now to make my decision whether I'll stay there or they will withdraw the offer. And I said to her, I said, Rabbi Sorokin, I've not even brought this up to the executive committee or the board. And she said, well, you really have to help me out. We're on the phone for 2 hours till 12:30 in the morning. And I said, I'll see what I can do. I'll try to make you an offer without putting specific terms with the offer. So I'm going to pick up what Robert just said. I called Rabbi Loeb up and I said, look, we're going to lose Rabbi Sorokin unless we can at least promise her that we will make her an offer at some point. And Rabbi Loeb started yelling at me and screaming at me. Said, we can't do that. When I came to Bethel, I had to first come and meet every member of the board. Then I had to do a sermon. Then I had to do this. Then I had to do that. I said, Mark, all we're saying is that we're going to lose her unless we at least promise her we will make her an offer. 2 hours later, Rabbi Loeb called me back. He said, gee, I called Rabbi Sorokin and told her we'd make her an offer. And exactly what happened to Robert. It was his idea at that point. So by the time my 2 years was finished, we had successfully arranged, and to Mark's satisfaction, to have Rabbi Loeb retire. We'd elevated Rabbi Schwartz to be senior rabbi unanimously, and we brought Rabbi Sorokin on board. There were a few other things that we did. We explored at great detail the possibility of Bethel starting a day school. At the time, there was a lot of momentum to have a day school. We studied this, we brought it to the entire board, and it was voted down. And the point is that sometimes what you do not do is just as important as what you do. And so I think that it was really an excellent decision not to start a day school at that point, even though many of the congregation did want to go forward with that idea. Yes, we did a few more trivial things like sushi in the sukkah, or we did a lot of outdoor services. But I think primarily my tenure was characterized by the overall change in the clergy. And I will say, and Michael will follow me, that maybe the greatest achievement of my administration and Michael's is that we introduced our respective children, my son and his daughter, to each other. And as Rabbi Schwartz said at their wedding, this was the first time that the offspring of two Bethel presidents got married. And so that I'll make as a gold star achievement of our administrations.
Amen.
Right.
Michael, 5 minutes. Unmute yourself. You're taking time away.
There we go. I'm Michael Steinhardt, president from 2007 to 2009, 25th president of the congregation. I'm going to start out by saying we've missed the most important points of our presidency, and that is the complaints we had about the kiddush. The bagels weren't good. There was no lox. There was no eggs, and I think that was the biggest part of the presidency. But picking up on what Rich said, so I was the president where the big changes actually took place. Rabbi Loeb was with me for a year and retired, and we had the big retirement gala for Rabbi Loeb. Rabbi Schwartz became the senior rabbi in my second year as president. And then we had a gala too, which I think we planned. I think the gala actually took place during Ray's tenure, but I'm not sure. It's getting a little fuzzy. But I mean, it was a big transition.
It was yours, Mike.
Okay, thank you. So so there was a lot of celebration during my tenure, but it was a big transition from Rabbi Loeb to Rabbi Schwartz, and I was honored to be part of that. And then, of course, Rabbi Sorokin joined us, and she was our first woman rabbi, and we had introduced her to the congregation. She used to ask me all the time who was who this person was or who that person was, and I'm from New York. I didn't know everybody, so I was embarrassed. But by now she knows more important. She knows many more people than I do. But I really had the honor of working with all of you as past presidents, and it was great. And you taught me the ropes again, because I'm not, I'm from New York. Robert is too, and so is Rich, and maybe a few others. But the point is, learning everybody and meeting everybody in the congregation was an honor. It was great. I don't want to forget. It was great working with Gail Kleiner and Aileen Scher. I mean, they made my job easier, and I'm sure many of you too. I can't tell you what an honor it was, and of course working with Dr. Boer. What can I say? I think again, the thing I enjoyed most during the tenure was trying to keep Gil and Eyal from killing each other, I should say like that. And so the way we did that was we had breakfast probably every 2 weeks or once a month at the Hilton, and we sat down and we talked. And honestly, they're to this day now, they're best of friends. But they each had their own agenda, and it was great. It was great working with it. But again, the transition from the clergy was really the main thing during the tenure. The great galas we had, and it was just a pleasure and honor. And honestly, I think all of you would say the same thing. You'd do it again if you got the opportunity, even though it was a great time. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for being under 5 minutes.
Ed, can I add
Sure.
just one thing to Michael's credits? The Rabbi Loeb was a retirement weekend. It started with a Friday night service,
Right.
Saturday morning service, the Sunday event with Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Yep.
We had a dinner before the event. There were so many members that wanted to be there. There was 500 to 600 members. We had to put tables up on the stage because there wasn't room in the Alfred Auditorium. We could have filled Camden Yards. And so you were president during the largest event ever in the history of Bethel.
Yeah, but the truth is that you ran the event, and if it wasn't for you, it wouldn't have been as wonderful as it was. So
if it had been bad, they would have blamed you. You were the president. I wasn't anybody.
You deserve the
Margot,
credit.
did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add that I was the lucky one who picked up Doris Kearns Goodwin from the airport and drove her to Bethel because she grew up in the same town that I did, Rockville Center, Long Island. And she was an avid Brooklyn Dodger fan as I was. I had this wonderful experience, and thank you for nominating her and giving me the opportunity to drive her to Bethel. It was fantastic, highlight of my life.
I just saw her on TV recently.
It was actually Rabbi Loeb's request that we reach out and have her as our keynote speaker. Probably for the same reason, because he was a Dodger fan. Didn't he come from Brooklyn?
I thought he was a Boston Red Sox.
Oh no, he was Boston. That's right. That's
Boston.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I believe Rabbi Loeb initially wanted Chief Justice Rogers.
Correct. No, Chief Justice, not Rogers.
Roberts, but was
Roberts.
Roberts. Yeah,
Roberts,
right.
Yes, and was somewhat disappointed when he could not.
Yeah, he already maximized the number of presentations for the year. He was booked 2 years in advance, but it turned out just fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ray?
Okay. My name is Raphael Kahn, also known as Ray, and I served between the years of 2009 and 2011. And actually, my dear friend Michael Steinhardt reminded me today, sent me a text, that it was on today, June 6th of 2009, that I was installed. So 14 years ago to the day I was installed. And I can honestly tell you that it was truly two of my most favorite and endearing and humbling years. Robert Keene came to me when I was treasurer at Beth, for the board, for the congregation, and asked if I would consider, and I really was not at all enthusiastic, and I pushed back and pushed back. At that point, I was deeply involved in our CPA practice. I was managing partner and really did not feel that I could undertake both. And fortunately, I made the decision to step down as managing partner and go up the ladder, become president, and never look back. And I, truly love the years that I had. I was very fortunate that in my term, having both Rabbi Schwartz and Rabbi Sorokin, in quotes, the dream team, our congregation continued to flourish, and financially and in numbers, unlike and bucking what many other congregations were being challenged with. So we were very fortunate, and I was very fortunate. And listening to Michael and all of you, and bringing back some of the memories that, quite honestly, I completely forgot. I remember the breakfast that Michael and I had with Eyal and Gil, because it was really an unusual chemistry between the two of them. They couldn't deal with one another, but if either one ever had an issue, the other one was first to support. Again, and also what was brought up by Rich with Rabbi Sorokin, I remember at a breakfast right before she was to start, Rabbi Loeb got up in front of everyone and said, we're having, our new rabbi come, and it's Rabbi Sorokin. I don't ever want to hear anybody say Dana. It's Rabbi Sorokin, and he was absolutely emphatic about that. So, where we all had mentors, Michael and I had Michael and Richard and Robert and Beverly. The one person that was always in my corner was Sidney Friedman. He was a rock, a foundation. I think of him so many times during the course of a year. And we were very fortunate, and I was very fortunate to have crossed paths with Richard. One of the things that is endearing to me, there was a book written many years ago, Tuesdays with Maury. And I had Wednesdays with Rabbi Schwartz. I would go every Wednesday morning. I would start with Eyal Bohr, who was our director of education. I would then listen to what Eyal was complaining about or trying to push and come up with his spin. I would then go to Aileen Scher, director of development, then to Gil Kleiner, who was the executive director and my right-hand person. And then, depending on the schedules, I would start with Rabbi Schwartz and then Rabbi Sorokin and then Cantor King. So I look back at that and treasure those many, many moments. Most of my tenure was very enjoyable, and I had very few issues and problems, but the ones that I did have were significant and are embedded in my memory banks. Had a couple of very, like all presidents, we deal with HR, employee issues, had a couple of them that really could have spun out of control. I need to publicly acknowledge the support, guidance of Steve Silverman in navigating us out of some very touchy situations. And, because of that guidance, we avoided, bad publicity and yada, yada. So, again, publicly, Steve, being the first vice president right behind me, it was a wonderful safety net. And speaking of Steve, I can't not bring up that one Shabbos morning where I was sitting in with the congregation. I was really focused in on the Torah service. Steve was Gabbai. And next thing I noticed, and I was sitting with a friend, and I said, oh my God, Steve looks like he's, leaning forward. Next thing I know, he collapsed. And fortunately, on the bima, not only was Steve, but there was God. And it just worked out that in the service, there was an EMT who was a guest to the bar mitzvah boy, and he was able to come up, use a defibrillator, CPR, and thank God we still have Steve, and to that I am eternally grateful.
Ray, I almost forgot about that.
And as a sidebar to that, I ran outside waiting for the ambulance and to direct them to the correct door. And while I was outside, there was a horrific accident right at our entranceway where a car didn't yield. And, so it was not a great morning for me. But the good thing that came out of that was we finally got a traffic light. Yeah, right. We had tried for years and years and years, and we finally got it. And to the one defining and most meaningful thing that happened in my 2-year stint was the passing of the death of Rabbi Loeb. I remember vividly, I was at the shul. I was at a meeting. I was called out of the meeting. I took a call from the president of shul in Milan, Italy. It was on October the 7th. And it just, it had such an impact on me and obviously the congregation that when I look back at the 2 years, and they were wonderful years, but that was the one event that forever will be with me up until the day that I'm no longer around. But overall, Bethel has meant to me and my family everything that anyone would ever want. I can only commend all of the presidents before me and all of the presidents after me. They're just a wonderful group of individuals. And, to that, I can't say much more.
Thank you. Now to the reborn Steve Silverman.
Good evening. I'm Steve Silverman. I was president from 2011 to 2013. And it's been fascinating listening to the history of the congregation because I've only been a member since 2000. So a lot of what happened in the congregation predates my involvement. Not only have I learned a lot about what went on, but Margot, I didn't realize this. I grew up in Merrick, Long Island, which is about 2 towns over from Rockville Center. I am a lifelong Dodger fan, and I love Doris Kearns Goodwin. And I wish I was in the car with you because I've read every book she's ever written about the Brooklyn Dodgers.
I actually picked her up at the airport, I think, pretty sure.
Margot said
she did.
No? Is that what you said you did? Okay. That's why I say we all get older. I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right.
Maybe she came a second time.
I've heard Sydney's name mentioned, and Ray mentioned it very prominently. And I just also wanted to say that even though Sydney and I were separated by quite a few years in our presidencies, I always felt like he was a mentor for me. I learned whatever I've learned about the Budget and Finance Committee, I've learned from Sidney Friedman. And I think he was a role model for a lot of us coming up. Not because we saw him as president, but because we saw him as a past president and how he conducted himself. I also wanted to thank, and this sounds like we're just passing on the kudos. Ray was an excellent mentor for me. He allowed me to tag along with him at a lot of those meetings so that when his term was up, I wasn't thrown into the deep water without having had the ability to have gone to meetings with the rabbi, with the executive director, sitting in with Al Bohr, sitting in with everybody there. So it wasn't something that just came up brand new. I had had a little bit of experience. So because this is also for the archives, I thought it might be interesting to point out that in 2011 to 2013, the size of the congregation at that point was 1,697 members, of which 1,390 were full paying. And out of the other 307, 191 were reduced members and 116 were honorary members. The key number is the 1,390 as the full paying dues members, because that's basically what we used as a revenue source. And I also have records going back to 92 and 93. And the largest the congregation has ever been was during Robert Keene's administration, which was 2002, 2003. We had 1,723 actual total members. But that doesn't tell the story because the full paying dues members, the largest was during David Yumkis's administration, and that was 1,501. So those are the largest that we've been. We've managed to keep our numbers relatively close to that 1,700 number, but the key is the full paying dues members. I also did some checking to see where the Hebrew school was during my administration. And although I can't take credit for it, we were actually at a 10-year high. We had 360 Hebrew school enrollments, which is down considerably. It's down by, I believe, at least 100 from that number currently. During my administration, we established a new employee handbook. We approved a new gift acceptance policy specifically because we had learned a very costly lesson that we were dedicating gifts without getting a specific amount of funds towards those gifts. And I believe our policy now is that we must have a minimum of 70 to 75% of the gift paid before we will put naming rights onto it. I had a couple of ideas that didn't seem to go anywhere, but during my administration, we had a volunteer Shabbat where we brought up members from all different committees and gave them aliyahs, and they took part in the service. And we just basically dedicated a specific Shabbat during Passover to thanking all of our volunteers. During my administration, the Legacy Society grew to 69 members. I have no idea where we currently are, but I think it's probably somewhere in the 70s to 80s. So that was a significant jump. We began planning our endowment campaign, or the next one that followed my administration. And this is where I just want to say something about Jerry Schneidman. All of us who had the opportunity to know and love Jerry, because you had to love him. There was just no two ways about it. He was just such a wonderful, wonderful person, and dedicated himself to Bethel, and brought an immense amount of knowledge and wherewithal to helping us get our endowment and our campaigns to the point where they are. And he obviously, I feel his loss all the time. I constantly think about him. I think about him just as laughter. I mean, if there's one thing that you could point to Jerry, it's the way he laughed. And I just think it's a shame that he can't be part of this. And I hope to hell that he's looking down on us and just laughing his head off. The one thing that I really felt was the one thing I'm most proud of during my administration was during Bev Penn's administration. I had started off as the second vice president, which meant that I was in charge of Memorial Park. I had been coming in when she was going out. And I developed an interest in Memorial Park, and Bev brought up the idea that maybe we were running out of space and that we needed to expand the Memorial Park that we had. And I got involved in it. And during my administration, we basically shepherded through 3 other administrations. And in 2012, specifically September 9th, 2012, we had the formal consecration of new Bethel Memorial Park. It has fulfilled and will fulfill the needs of the congregation forever. There's no way we will ever need any more grave sites for our members, non-members. We have over 4,000 grave plots that are available for usage, and that probably translates to close to 75 years worth of usage for people buying plots and then filling the plots. So that's probably what I'm most proud of during my administration. And thank you.
Thank you. Mike Rubenstein. Is he still up? Mike?
Unmute.
Michael's on mute.
There he is.
Hi, I'm Michael Rubenstein, and I was president from 2015 to 2017. And it's really heartening listening to everybody speak about their history and what they experienced. And it's kept reminding me that although Rabbi Schwartz keeps saying "L'dur Vador," this is like "Le President va President," because everybody is built on the person before them. And for sure I was, because my immediate predecessor was Jerry Schneidman. And he helped me so much getting ready for the presidency on Wednesday mornings or Wednesdays, because it went into the afternoon. We would spend almost that was the whole morning and up to around 1 or 2 o'clock at the shoal, meeting with various clergy and administrators and everything, and also sharing grilled cheese sandwiches at the Bethel lunch. but he was great, and he is missed. And he was a very important part of what was done and finished during my administration. A lot of people have talked about that they started things, and I'm going to enumerate some things, but I can't take any credit for starting them. They were started by others, and I just want to go through some of that. Probably the biggest shock during my administration is I was on an aircraft carrier with my grandchildren and Hetty, my wife, and I got an email. This was in May of 2016, and it was from Gil Kleiner giving me notice that he was leaving in July. And this was after 27 years of being at Bethel. We had gone to Jacksonville for a large congregation conference, and I guess the rabbi took him aside. And as most of you know, that's where he went from Bethel. He went down to Jacksonville. So that was, concerning, because leaving July 30th, the holidays were only less than 2 months away. And if you all were ever in Gil's office around high holidays, you know that he had maps out of the entire congregation and knew where everybody was sitting and who went where and what he was going to do. But we were able to form a committee, and Ray Kahn led the committee, and we hired Josh Bender, who started the following September, or that September, and he was a very big asset and was very helpful, because this time of year in Judaism in America, the Pew Study had just released a huge amount of information about the traits of Judaism, about how Americans thought of Judaism, what they believed in, what they didn't. And a large part of that was tied to another theory that was going around at that time that was called relational Judaism. And how do you get people into the shul? You can't just grab them off the street. There's got to be something to draw them in. And we worked a great deal on that. And I had Denise next to me also that time. So it was a good team going forward. We also had a Rabbi George Wilichowski. Some of you may remember, he wasn't there for about a year or so. He was a part-time rabbi for engagement mainly. And actually, he was Gil's son-in-law. He was a great addition while he was there, but he ended up going, I believe, to California after that. Some of the things that happened while I was president, which I can't take credit for because they started before me. The Soul Center opened June 13th. I'm sorry, sometime in the fall of 2015. And that has grown tremendously since its opening. I think it's gone far beyond what even Rabbi Sorokin thought it would do. It's been terrific. The preschool was totally renovated. It was torn apart and totally renovated. The downtown preschool opened. Al was very strong about opening a downtown preschool. And finally, after looking at places and everything, we decided on a church downtown. And we started the preschool there. Of course, Al wanted to open preschools all over the city. But the other thing, one of the things we did several times was Shabbat Match, which is where people signed up to go to other people's. People would sign up as hosts, and other people would sign up to go over to their houses to have Shabbat dinner. And this was all part of the relational Judaism of getting people involved, getting people to know each other. We also had our first Light Up the Sky with Kizik, that Hanukkah in 16. And also during this time, there were changes in duties of people. Cantor King took over the B'nai Mitzvah program. We started a new kitchen. The kitchen was totally renovated. And although, as Denise said, there were armed security guards during her administration, it was during mine that we first started to have anybody sitting at the front by the door. And the other thing that I was proud of is that the Gorn service, the third high holiday service, the number was shrinking and shrinking. And I decided to ask Rabbi Schwartz if he would support changing that to having that as a family service, which we eventually did, and we integrated everybody that was in the Gorn into the Offit or the Berman Reuben. And that was a great success the first couple of years. In fact, I think they ran out of space for people as they got going. But the problem was is that COVID came along, and so there was a break in that. We also did the 5-year strategic planning, and we had the board involved in exercises doing that, writing things on paper that were on the wall, getting ideas together. We formed separate committees in several different categories with the chair of each of those categories. They would meet 3 or 4 times, discuss the issues that were put before them, and they would make a report to the board. And it was also during my administration that we had the first steak in the sukkah, which has continued and is a large event at the men's club. But probably the one thing I'm very proud of Bethel about was a January weekend in 2016 when we had 32 inches of snow. There was a double bar mitzvah that weekend. And we were able to hold a bar mitzvah on Monday. And there were like 150 people there. And the girl who's being bat mitzvahed, the family that had a bat mitzvah the following week graciously said, "Why don't you come and join us and we'll do a double?" I mean, I think that really showed the spirit of Bethel. And that's what makes Bethel so great. It was a rewarding 2 years, and I'm glad to be among the ranks of all of you.
Thank you, Mike. We're going to jump out of order here. We're going to go to Dave Harrison now.
Thanks, Ed. I'm David Harrison. I believe Rabbi Schwartz said yesterday I was the 32nd president of Bethel from 2021 to 2023. I know you think of me as the kid in this group, but I just want to say, having just come off my serving as president, how grateful I am to all of you. I think I've gotten to know almost all of you really, really well. And as I served as president, I certainly made it my job to listen to if we disagreed, we disagreed. But as I said yesterday, we do it the right way. I think that is the Bethel way. I've learned from you. There's no question to me how special this is. How many people are on this call? 16 people are on this call. What it also says to me is how grateful I am that not only is there this culture of past presidents, but there's also the synagogue remaining strong. One thing that maybe I was more keenly aware of or had in mind was the great risk to the existence of the synagogue of just changes in the way people live and how many other synagogues are declining in attendance. Some specific things that I want to point to. I was proud to be president. I am proud that I was president when we expanded the clergy team. We've added Rabbi Zaslow, who I believe has been a really nice asset to the group. I think she's been terrific. We also, it fell during my term to celebrate the 75th anniversary. And I won't take credit for the 4 chairs, one of whom is with us on the call. They've just done a tremendous job. I will say what I wanted that 75th to be was not just the gala or the live. A lot of people, I think, thought that the 75th was going to be that one night and we would celebrate as a party. I wanted it to be a year-long look back and look ahead. And we had this just expansive, almost exhausting calendar of things that we've done to celebrate the 75th. We're switching history here. I texted Ed a little bit. I do have to be somewhere. So I texted Ed and asked if we could switch order. But it's important for Ed to talk about the pandemic and how managing that, and we had a physician on hand, thank goodness, managing the pandemic and all that needed to be done. We needed to embrace technology. We needed to get people connected, and we stayed strong. And I'll let Ed speak to that, but I'll just jump ahead in that it was during my term that we emerged from the pandemic, and thank God we did. And I think that people came through with an even greater sense of community and what this Bethel community means to them, and how fragile it is. How fragile it is, not only because of COVID, but because of all the other things I mentioned, the existential threats to keeping a congregation strong. So we came out of the pandemic. We're back in the building. I don't even want to say this, but it almost feels like, I'm a big Friday night goer. It almost feels like our Friday nights are back to normal. Knock wood, Kanahara, right? As my mother-in-law used to say. A couple other things we did. We conducted a thriving congregations assessment, building on the steps that Michael laid out when he was president and did strategic planning. I think we've taken another step toward the next phase of strategic planning. I just want to say thank you to all of you for the advice that you've given me, for creating this culture of past presidents. I look forward to continuing it. I'm grateful to be a part of this group. And I'll close by saying I didn't have the pleasure of knowing Rabbi Loeb, but I just want to say that the way you all feel about Rabbi Loeb and the respect and the admiration that you had for him, is how I feel about Rabbi Schwartz. And it was a main reason that I got involved. I'm almost getting emotional talking about it. The great, great highlight of serving as president for me was, it wasn't Wednesdays, Ray, for me, it was Fridays. Friday mornings, I had 15, 20, 30 minutes with Rabbi Schwartz. And I said to him, this probably is the reason I'm doing it. I'm going to miss this. And I'm not going to take up he said, well, you'll keep coming in, but I'm not going to take up his time. I know firsthand how busy he is, but he to me is an exemplary human being. I hope to emulate him. And I just want you all to know that that the way you feel about him, it's kind of like Johnny Carson and David Letterman. It's kind of like the way the way David Letterman felt about Johnny Carson. That's how I feel about David Letterman. Anyway, I don't know if you all get that analogy, but thank you for your time. Michael, I hope I came in under 5.
Okay, well, I guess they say you save the best for last. But anyway, I'm Ed Mishner. I was president from 2019 to 2021. And I'd like to just give a little perspective. I have been a lifelong member of Bethel. We're going back to 1951. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be president. I thought that was reserved for either wealthy people or very religious people or whatever. And one afternoon in Kiddush, I was corralled by Mike Rubenstein and Steve Silverman and said, "How would you like to be president?" I said, "Sure." What do I know? Okay, I'll be president. And it happened. And just to fast forward, it was the 2 best years of my non-professional and non-family life. I will forever be indebted to them and to everybody who's on this call, as well as the rabbis, for just the 2 best years, that I could ever imagine. And like the others have said, I leaned heavily on my predecessors for their advice. And actually, not much happened during my administration. 5 months after I was installed, the day after Yom Kippur, my executive director, Josh Bender, says, "Hi, I'm going to be the next executive director of the JCC in Washington." I said, "Where'd that come from?" And all of a sudden, I'm 5 months into this, and I say, okay, well, so what I did was what anybody would do. I formed a triumvirate to take over their role, including Alan Dornfeld, Amanda Beitman, who is our development, and Randy Arntz, who was our director of finance. And it was like the 3-headed, genius. And we got along, and we did have a search for a new executive director, and we hired one. That's Ben Wachstein, who's currently our ED, and he started the last month of my presidency. So I basically went 2 years without an executive director. So that's how I started. And then, if you remember, in the winter of 2019, so this is about 5 or 6 months after I started, and into the winter of 2020, there was a virus. And that virus later became known as COVID and the pandemic. So on March the 13th, we were due to have Jonathan Ornstein come from Poland in the JCC. We had met him on our trip to Eastern Europe, and we canceled because basically the world stopped that day. And the last pandemic we had was exactly 100 years before, and that was 1919. So there wasn't really anybody I could lean on for their advice. But we managed, and basically the synagogue was closed. There were no services held. Nobody was allowed into the to the synagogue. So that actually made my job easier, because people say to me, "Did people fetch to you? Did you have a lot of problems?" I said, no, nobody ever saw me. They never talked to me. I never had a problem with a congregant. But out of that came what we all now know as Zoom. And that is how we are conducting this interview tonight, this roundtable discussion. And Zoom is still very prevalent, although we are back in the synagogue, as Dave said. But we do have the capability of having Zoom services for those who cannot attend service, maybe out of town, people can watch. So that was a legacy from that. But in combination with COVID, I had to put on my other hat, which is as a physician. We formed a medical committee, and we set protocols, we set standards for what can be done, what cannot be done in the synagogue. And that became pertinent because right after the COVID started, Rabbi Schwartz's wife became very ill. So we were dealing with that as well. And he obviously, had to take care of that situation. And I did everything possible to let him have time off so that he could take care of that. We did have Rabbi Sorokin available also. And that helped. Everybody pitched in. But part of my role at that time was to protect Rabbi Schwartz from getting sick, as well as make sure Becky didn't get sick. There was also another clergy person who had some family illness. I have also felt the obligation to protect her. So I did everything in my power to make sure that those two people, as well as everybody, did not become ill. And we were very lucky because they didn't become ill. So we managed to get through all of that. And then also our building supervisor became ill, and I had to deal with that. And thank God he's doing well now. But that was another person that needed protected. So for those 2 years that I was there, after March 13th of 2020, I never saw anybody in the synagogue other than a few of the staffers. The rabbis were not coming in. The cantor wasn't coming in. I remember coming in and giving my state of the congregation speech during Yom Kippur in the Alford Auditorium. I was the only person in there other than Rabbi Sorokin, and that was a little eerie, but I thought it came off pretty well considering. And we got by, and what I learned from that is how tremendous our clergy were, how they just adapted to everything that we suggested, what they wanted to do. And our congregants were terrific. We formed a caring network where we checked in on our congregants, especially the older congregants, make sure that if they needed transportation, we took them to a doctor. If they needed food, if they needed their medicines, whatever it might be. And the congregation just really came together. And I really felt that my other obligation was we must keep everybody engaged in the synagogue. And the reason I felt this is I didn't want people to say after a year or 2 years, I really didn't need Bethel. I didn't miss it. So we went above and beyond to put as much information, as much entertainment that we could to our congregants, so that they knew we were still there. We were still a vibrant, thriving synagogue. It's just a little different. And then one of the things I was really proud of that I did is we had over 6 weeks interviews with the clergy, and the idea was to let our congregants get to learn more about our clergy, and not just that they stand up there and conduct services. And I really enjoyed that. I got to learn so much about them. They were all really cooperative, and they enjoyed doing it. And I think that our congregants enjoyed it. And then the last thing, or maybe the last thing, is I really became very close with Dr. Bohr. He has done a phenomenal job with the Adult Education Center. I mean, that's a full-time job in of itself, but he and I have collaborated very well. I've had some suggestions as to who we should have for guests, and he's had them, and he's allowed me to interview these people. And I have really enjoyed that. We met some very interesting people. In fact, we talked today about, he's got 8 or 9 people that he wants to have interviewed for next year. And I saw someone who was extremely interesting on television today that we're considering. But that just shows how, we all work so closely together. And this was just, I don't want to say a labor of love. It was just, one of the finest things that I've ever done in my life. I want to just go back to one thing that Bob Smelkinson said. I'm pretty sure it was Bob who said this. He talked about how Joe Lepovsky went to pick up people for school. If I had the wrong president, I apologize. When I was a 10-year-old kid and I was a student at Bethel, Mr. Lepovsky picked me up every Saturday morning to take me to junior congregation. At that time, junior congregation was huge. I mean, we used to fill up the entire Bluefeld Chapel with that, and it was terrific. And he used to always pick me up. He was also teaching my oldest daughter her bat mitzvah when unfortunately he passed away, and it was July of 1990. And that was a big loss. But I think I echo everybody's points that we became president because we love Bethel. And Bethel is a leader, not just in Baltimore, but I think in the entire country. Because I know when I was involved with the United Synagogue, and I talked to presidents from different states and cities, we were far and above what everybody else was. They would say, what do you mean you have a development, or you have this with your rabbi? And so we are really, really fortunate for what we have. But I think we have what we have because of the clergy we've had, as well as the leadership that we've had. And that includes the lay leaders as well as the staff. And I applaud everybody on this call tonight. And I really, really appreciate everybody taking out a couple of hours of their time to do this. So I said, when I sent out emails, it would be fun to just kick around, what do we think Bethel may look like in the next few generations? And I don't know if anybody's thought about it, if you have any thoughts you want to bring up here. I know I have my thoughts.
Yeah, I have
Michael,
a question.
you look. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Everybody can unmute now.
At the annual meeting yesterday, David Harrison, you mentioned that, or you didn't mention, but our current president mentioned that the two of you had these disputes. What kind of disputes that I couldn't figure that out, that the two of you had all these disputes.
I think I mentioned it, not disputes. We just don't always agree on everything.
No,
but it's handled. It's handled in a really nice way. He may have mentioned it later. I don't know.
Okay.
Ed, can I make a suggestion, please?
Who's that, Rich? Yeah,
Rich.
hi.
I think the topic of the future of Bethel, the future of Judaism in Baltimore, are really important questions. I think it deserves its own night. I think all of us have been going for over 2 hours, and I think that we should defer. I mean, I'll go along with the consensus, but I think it's such an important topic that we really should schedule.
I'm just doing this as a kibitz. I think the chance of getting all 16 of us together again.
Well, I think everybody's really enjoyed it, Ed. So this is terrific. You've done a great job.
If you want to stop in here, that's
congratulations
fine.
on organizing
together.
Huh?
I think if you were to schedule something 1 or 2 months out for that topic for the future, I think you'd have a full screen again. I really
agree.
Ed, I think Alan is right. As many of you know, I haven't been in Baltimore or Bethel for 28 years.
Oh.
I've been down in Naples, Florida. When we told friends of ours in Baltimore that we were retiring and moving to Naples, Florida, the first thing our Bethel friends said, "What are you doing? There are no Jews there." It was right. Today we are a member, not only of Bethel, but of a congregation that is 1,000 members.
Wow.
1,000 members. And I could give you chapter and verse on how that has occurred, but that's for the next meeting. But if you'll give me one opportunity to just share a little funny story with you, which I did with the other guy. So we're all presidents, past presidents. I forget exactly at what point during the high holiday services. I think it's first day, it's Yom Kippur morning. And we all stopped, finished. Isn't that when the rabbi and the president and maybe the cantor go to the front door and people walk by and walk out and shake hands and congratulate? Is that when
that's Erev Yom Kippur.
Erev Yom Kippur. Very good. Thank you. So on Erev Yom Kippur, it's my turn. I'm the new president, and I'm going to stand at the door with Rabbi Loeb and then greet all the congregants. I didn't know, I knew a lot of them, but I didn't know all of them. And this little old lady comes through early on. She had a very nice Yiddish accent, which my grandmother had. And she shakes hands with Mark Loeb, thanks him very much. And then she looks at me and she says, "So, you're the new president?" Yes, I am. Albert Katz is my name. I have a problem. Oh, God. I said, how can I help you? She said, "There is chewing gum under my seat." That was my first problem with the high house. My chewing gum under my seat. I've told that story many times. Anyway, that's another story.
Well, that's good. All right, so you want to wrap it up? We can try to
the topic could go on for a long time. I think it's good to wrap it up. Probably good to wrap it up.
The future of Judaism in Baltimore, or the future of Bethel within the context of Baltimore, is a great topic.
Okay,
great.
Well, give us an excuse to get together. We'll have drinks.
That's good. That's good.
It's a good excuse.
Bring my own.
Yeah, this is a good venue.
I just want to wrap it up with a little summary sentence or paragraph here, and then I'll let everybody go. So, from all of us to our future Bethel family, we hope you find this history to be informative and that Bethel is still a leader in conservative Judaism in Baltimore. I'd also like to thank Jeremy Silbert, Director of Communications and Marketing, for putting the technical component of this together. And I'll end it by saying shalom.
Shalom.
Hello.
Shalom.
Thank you, Ed.
And thank everybody for doing
Thank you, Eddie. You did a great job.
Great job.
It was so good to see everyone.
Take care, all.
All right.
I thought everybody was great. I
You're
learned
safe
more
and
about
healthy.
Bethel than I knew.
Right.